My name is Jane Young, and today I'm conducting an interview for the Nashville Bar Association Legal History Project. We are at the Nashville Bar Association offices, and it is June 10th, 2025. And I have the honor of interviewing United States District Judge Waverly Crenshaw, who serves as judge for the Middle District of Tennessee. Could you state your name, please?
Well, it's still Waverly Crenshaw.
And when were you born?
I was born here in Nashville, Tennessee on December the 17th, 1956, and I've been a Nashvilleian all my life, never left.
Something of a unicorn, as they frequently remind us.
Indeed.
Let's
There's a few
talk
of
a
us
li-
around.
Yes, let's talk a little bit about your childhood. We talked about when you were born. Tell me about your birth family, your parents and your grandparents and so forth.
Well, I grew up in South Nashville, on Second Avenue South, which is now being regentrified and in an incredible place. But my mother and father, we lived on Second Avenue South. Down the street was an uncle, my father's brother, who lived there with his family. Behind us was his parents' home. So growing up, I was surrounded by a lot of family on my father's side. And the South Nashville neighborhood was just a great place to grow up. I went up the street to Johnson Elementary School for grades 1 through 6. I just walked up the street to do that, and then went on First Avenue South to Cameron High School when it was a high school for grades 9 through 10. And then I would walk through the alley between Second and First to go to church, which was C. Hubbard United Methodist Church. So my life went from First Avenue to Second Avenue, back to First Avenue, and that's where I grew up for many, many years.
Okay, at some point, can you tell me a little bit about your parents' jobs or your grandparents?
My mother was a homemaker. She didn't work outside of the house. She kept the home and ran that, which was invaluable. My father had a number of positions. I guess the first one I really remember, he was manager of Union Protective Life Insurance Company, the Nashville office. They were based in Memphis. And I can remember going to his office on the weekends where he would be working and the other agents would be working. That was located off of Jefferson Street. So that was quite an adventure for me to leave South Nashville and go all the way over to Jefferson Street, where he managed that insurance company. I have some memory of the people there. I just remember being a lot of agents and I've seen pictures that sort of um, give me flashbacks to things I can remember. And he stayed in that position for quite a while. I can't tell you the number of years, but for several years, and then left there to go to the state of Tennessee, Department of Revenue. And he was one of the first African Americans to be hired in the Department of Revenue. I think my recollection is he got that position because of a neighbor on Second Avenue South, Robert Lyford, who was an attorney and, of course, judge here in Nashville. So Mr. Lyford is somebody that I grew up around. He went to the same church as we did, C. Hubbard United Methodist Church. He lived, I guess, 5 doors down from where we lived. So it was not unusual for Halloween, for Christmas, to go to his house to get candy and gifts. I knew Judge Lillard's wife as well as his daughter, and they would be in our house and I would be in their house. But my father had a close relationship with him, and I think that's how he uh, was hired at the Department of Revenue. Either when Buford Ellington was the governor or Frank Clement was the governor, they flip-flopped. But I do recall
So
that.
sometime in the 60s, probably.
So he was there until he became ill and disabled. He had a stroke, and then left the Department of Revenue. Behind me, behind our house, our home, was his father and his mother, and his father was a Methodist minister. And in fact, he was the minister of the church we would go to, Sea Heaven United Methodist Church. And I can remember him, my grandmother, Susie B. Crenshaw. But I was very young, so I have some recollections, pictures have brought it out. And then his family, both in South Nashville and throughout Nashville, and I think some in Hartsville, Tennessee. I think we would go up there for family picnics and what have you.
Trousdale County.
Trousdale County, made some trips up there. On my father's side, and then my mother's side, she was from Louisiana, Alexandria, Louisiana. And during the summer, we would always make a trip back to Louisiana to visit with her sisters and brother. And that was always a big event. Louisianans like to eat, and we did a lot of eating of gumbo and oysters and all kinds of Louisiana cuisine. And just had fun really going from house to house, because when we went down there, that was a big deal. The Nashville.
So what part of Louisiana? Down coastal or?
Alexandria, in the middle.
Okay.
It's a south of Monroe and it's south of Shreveport and north of Monroe.
Right.
Not a big city, but we would fellowship with them, dinners and playing games for usually a week down there every summer. So that was on my mother's side.
So during that time period, other than Judge Lillard, were there other lawyers that you knew? And
there were. My father was a member of Omega Psi Phi fraternity, and I think Mr. Luby, Z. Alexander Luby, was also a member.
Okay, now what is that fraternity?
It's a college fraternity.
Okay.
That he joined at Tennessee State University. So I have some recollection of Mr. Luby and my father connecting, and I remember that. And obviously, as I got older, got to appreciate the role and the contribution he made to Nashville. And then on the other side, we weren't necessarily friends with Avon Williams, but we had some family members on my mother's side who had a connection with her through cousins. So that's how I became aware of Avon Williams. And of course, during the 60s, and especially when, by that time, I was born in 56, so by the time I'm 5 or 6, civil rights movement was really gaining a lot of momentum, and in Nashville in particular. So I can remember a lot of things going on that were part of the civil rights movement, and how there was a lot of expectation, a lot of feelings that things were really changing. And as a child, I came to realize I could be and do whatever I wanted to be, because things were changing so fast. Segregation and what was not previously available all of a sudden said everything's possible.
So your elementary school was segregated?
Yes. And
had been for,
as well as grades 7 through 9. And when
Cameron.
I was at Cameron, when I was in the 9th grade, Judge L. P. Morton decided we were going to have integration in Nashville. And I got bused to McGavock High School, which was the first comprehensive high school in Tennessee. So we would I would be at the bus stop for 5 o'clock every morning to go out to McGavock and Donaldson. And that's where I graduated from high school.
So what grades were those?
That was grades 10, 11, and 12.
All right.
Yeah.
And tell me about a little bit about your high school career at McGavock. What type of activities were you involved in?
Always in the band. The band totally took up all my time in the 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade, the marching band, during football season, the concert band, after football season. So I was a band geek.
So what was what instrument did you play?
Trumpet.
All right.
became first chair, first trumpet in the concert band, and I knew I was not good enough to make any money, so I said, okay, I need to move on and find my calling. It's not playing the trumpet.
But that group served as a lot
Yeah.
friends and
It did, and it certainly gave me a place because McGavock was experiencing integration. In the first year, there was a lot of violence.
really,
Oh yeah, tremendous violence at McGavock. We would have armed policemen there because you essentially took Two Rivers, Donaldson, and Cameron High School and just put us all in one pot, and nobody thought about or had a plan for how we all going to get along. We had all grown up in a segregated environment, and all of a sudden here we're in a big pot together. So it took some getting used to. So yes, there was definitely some violence, and things had to work themselves out. They got a bit better each year. So by the time the first class graduated, the first class had been there 3 years, things had smoothed out, but it was definitely rough the first year.
you think some of that, in addition to the aspect of integration, also was caused, as you mentioned, the three schools coming together. So people are brought out of their community and they still have allegiance to where they
Yes,
lived.
definitely. It took some time for everybody. Now, I remember when we went through the process of what are the school colors going to be?
Right.
And then what's the school mascot going to be? And everybody had, their own connections. Cameron was blue and gold, and it took some doing for the school to sort of find its own personality.
Yes. Do you recall any teachers that were instrumental in shaping you?
I smile because I do remember one teacher in one situation that maybe the reason I am where I am now, but when we first got to McGavock, which was in increments, 3,000 students divided into 4 schools. So I was lucky enough to have a family member who was a guidance counselor, but not in my school. She knew my family, she knew my father and mother, so she was taking care of me. She learned that my course schedule, well, it included things like woodworking and uh, uh, car repair, and
It did include
it
that.
did. That's all included. It was more courses, skilled trade courses, not uh, algebra or geometry or trigonometry, no physics, none of the hard courses that would be college preparatory. And when she saw my schedule and realized, but this isn't going to get you into college, she changed all of that. And she and my real guidance counselor had a little discussion saying, no, you don't know who he is. He needs to be being prepared for college. And I went from all those easy courses to college courses that probably changed my trajectory because it did prepare me for the college entrance exams and all of that.
So in placing you in those courses is very interesting. To not place you in algebra and so forth. Do you think that was discriminatory?
Oh, definitely. And I think even the guidance guy, well, I had no idea. I just assumed that he needed to find a skill, and she did not think that I was. Of course, she didn't know anything about me or my family or anything. Just assumed that I wasn't college material. The other guidance counselor, who was Lily Bowman, knew I was, and made sure she understood that that was what the expectation was. And she didn't know. I mean, she was like all of the students, getting used to 3,000 students. I mean, you didn't know where you could have known all those people. And I wasn't special to her. She didn't hardly know my name. I'm just one of 3,000.
Right.
So it really did take somebody who was a family friend, who was in the right place at the right time. And actually, it was her, Miss Bowman, who convinced me to go to Vanderbilt undergrad.
Okay.
Because
So they decided that Vanderbilt would be an appropriate place for you.
Well, she did.
Okay.
Miss Bowman did, because I had enough credits that I could graduate early. So I was going to graduate from high school early as a junior, because I had enough, I could do that. And had applied to the local colleges, Fisk, Tennessee State. I think that's it. And I was just headed there. That was going to be good. And she said, "No, I think you need to think about going to Vanderbilt." I said, "Oh, Vanderbilt." That was not on my list at all. But I stayed that extra year, kept thinking about it, applied, and ended up at Vanderbilt for undergrad.
So that kind of brings us, we've talked a little bit about your career at McGavock, and now you applied to Vanderbilt and you were admitted. And what did you major in?
Did not know what I was doing. I picked political science, which is just a horrible.
Okay.
There's nothing to do with that except go to law school.
And did you take minor? I mean, did you have a minor?
I think it was equally useless, sociology.
Oh my, oh my. So you took those courses, and what, again, were there professors in college that were very meaningful to you, or?
There were, I guess, to think, to reflect on that and think about that, the route that I took. I think I grew up, again, the civil rights movement was just in its heyday as I was sort of coming to understand what, 5, 6, 7, 8, and that whole round. And I had seen and observed that it was causing a lot of positive change in the opportunity to develop me, to others, and to Blacks as a race. I can remember President Johnson coming to Nashville, and it was back at the old airport, and the motorcade proceeded from the airport through Murfreesboro Pike,
Right.
past Cameron, where I was actually at elementary school, past the elementary school. And my father came and got me, and we stood in throngs of people to see President Johnson motorcade down Murfreesboro Road, headed to downtown Nashville. And that made a big impression. I saw what was happening on TV, and certainly what Martin Luther King was doing, then Kennedy as president, Johnson and the civil rights. I didn't know what civil rights were, but I knew it was a good thing because everybody was really happy about it. And it was creating new possibilities that people hadn't experienced before. So I think by the time I got to Vanderbilt, and probably one of the reasons I ended up in Vanderbilt, I says, well, I need to do my part. So if going to Vanderbilt is a way to keep things moving forward, then let me try. So I had some idea of how laws were impacting I say normal, regular citizens, and especially Black citizens, and especially we were talking about doing things that had never been done before, and people were being appointed to positions that they'd never had before. It was just positive change occurring that made an impression. And I think that's when sort of my bent toward the law kind of started. I certainly knew some attorneys, but I was seeing it on the national level, and it was such an energy going on in the country as a whole. King is assassinated, Kennedy's assassinated, Robert Kennedy's assassinated, Malcolm X. But nevertheless, that was part of the history of the civil rights movement that was impacting my life greatly and the lives of others.
Yes, yes. So seeing the, as you say, sort of coming of age at the height of the civil rights movement, and then these events occurred that you saw and affected you, and made you want to go to law school. So then you decided to apply for law school, and where did you decide to go? Or
I applied to Vanderbilt, of course, and stayed in Nashville, and wanted to practice. And my activities at Vanderbilt weren't a lot, but I did get the opportunity to meet Chancellor Hurd. Of course, he was very much involved on the forefront of the civil rights movement and things that he was doing at Vanderbilt. And I remember I said, well, maybe my chances of getting into law school would be better if the chancellor would do a recommendation. So I asked him to, and he did, and it may have helped.
I would think so, wouldn't you? It's interesting. So you matriculated, as they say, to Vanderbilt Law School. And tell me about those years. Again, professors that had an impact on you and that sort of thing.
Yeah, it was a good experience. I think the class that I was in at Vanderbilt, class of '78, may have had the largest number of Black undergraduates in its history. I think we had 30 plus. So it was a good group of folks that you could have fellowship with.
At Vanderbilt Law School.
At Vanderbilt undergrad.
Okay.
At undergrad. In law school, it was kind of different there. It was only 3 Blacks in my class.
There were only three?
3 Blacks.
You and 2 others?
Right.
Were they men?
One was a man, one was a female. The female was Joanne Mitchell, who is currently a executive vice president at the University of Pennsylvania. And the other one was Jerome Kearney, and he's a U.S. magistrate judge over in Little Rock. So I say we all 3 did pretty good.
Well, absolutely, absolutely. So that was kind of a shocking thing. I mean, not a shock. How would you describe it?
It was disappointing. It was very disappointing because one would have thought there would have been more than 3. And the fact that it was just, I think the law school was still struggling with how it was going to diversify its student body. And I think we were on the edge. Since then, it's done better, but sometimes looks like it ebbs and flows in terms of making sure that it's accessible to all people.
Were there Black professors there?
There was one, Robert Belton, that I became close to, who was just very helpful, making sure that he knew what we were doing and making sure we were following a path that was going to be helpful in our careers. And I was fortunate to be his research assistant. But more than that, he was just a person. As you know, law school is difficult. It's one of the most taxing times of your life. And to have a Black professor there that you could literally walk into his office at any time and say, I don't have a clue what I'm doing, I'm scared to death, was very helpful in making sure that we stayed on the right track, not just for me, but for Joanne as well.
What did he teach? What did he specialize in?
Employment law, which ended up being where I practiced, and I'm sure he had a great influence on that.
Sure, what? Sorry.
He had a great influence in my desire to.
Right, in terms of employment law, yes. I know that he served later as counsel in some cases, particularly some cases that were on appeal and so forth. Anything else you want to mention about Vanderbilt?
It was a good experience. I've come to realize that, and I think it's still true, Vanderbilt does, I think, equip you with a really solid legal education. And I was a beneficiary of that opportunity to be at the law school. And then you did meet so many people, folks who you stayed in contact with over the years, like yourself, your husband. It was both were dear friends that I've maintained, and others as well. So that was a very positive experience, although from time to time it was nervous.
Well, absolutely, absolutely. And your class included some folks. I mean, Carl Dean, the former mayor.
Tom Vollen, he's a
right,
federal judge over in
right.
Knoxville.
I didn't realize that was in that class.
Mhm.
Coldine's
Bill
wife.
Young, chancellor here in Davidson County, and other great
Oh my goodness. All right. So would you recommend, let's just start because this is when you began your career, but would you recommend the law to young folks now?
I would recommend it be something they consider, but I think you really have to want to do it because it remains a very taxing um, career, both when you're in law school and afterwards, because it's all about your time and where you put that time to develop yourself as a lawyer and in the profession. So I think it's a great education, is a different way or a very effective way to learn how to think and analyze things that we've learned is applicable in a number of vocations. You've got a number of people now with law degrees who lead colleges and universities. You've got lawyers now who are CEOs of companies. It's an incredible opportunity to train your mind in a way that you look at things differently, and sometimes that can be very helpful in industries and other segments of life. So I think you consider, but it's so much work, as you know, it has to be something you want to do. And if you don't want to do it,
Absolutely.
it's gonna
And
be
in
hard.
terms of the public's perception of lawyers, do you think that they're held in a high esteem, particularly?
Well, I would hope so. I think, as you know, um, that's changed over time, and I think right now we're in a state of flux about the law and how it's perceived by the public and non-lawyers. Uh, I guess my view on all of that is two things. One, I still think it carries a lot of persuasion and importance in the lives of citizens. Yes, we have a lot of comments and criticisms about lawyers and the legal profession. But at the end of the day, I think it's still part of the foundation of our communities of our government. Here's the example I would give because it amazes me constantly. And it's also inspirational. Whenever I have a jury trial, I've just been so impressed with how seriously lay people take the responsibility and how hard they work to follow the law and be fair and not show any bias. And these are lay people. These are plumbers. These are people without high school degrees. These are homemakers, and then they're business executives. They work very hard. After every jury trial, I go back and personally thank the jury for their service because it's an imposition. You stopped everything you were doing.
Sure.
You came to this courthouse. You can't leave until I tell you you can leave. You have to be here when I say. And so I go back and thank them and I ask them to critique the process. And here's what I've learned almost consistently in every jury. Everyone who gets on the jury, they would tell you when I came for jury selection that first morning, I did not want to be on this jury. And I was trying to figure out any kind of way that I can get out of this jury service. And then after they served and they deliberated and they reached a verdict, this was the most wonderful thing I've ever experienced. Can I come back next week and do it again? And they all want to come back. So why do you want to come back? And this is because you really do feel that you're part of the process of making the decision, but also in the administration of justice. They really don't show any favoritism. They really try to follow the law. So that's a long ways of saying I think we still have a strong position in
Yeah.
our society.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
That they enjoy and learn about the legal system and take pride in being a part of it.
Yeah.
So that's very important. Now let's talk a little bit about your early career. after you graduated law school, you began, let's see, can you kind of describe where you first worked
Okay.
and so forth? You clerked for some judges.
I clerked for some judges. I clerked for the Chancery judges here in Davidson County, C. Allen High, Irving Gilcrease, and Robert Brandt, and that was for a year, and that was a great experience. Then I went with Judge Nixon to the federal court, and there, it was, I'm sorry, I should have looked at, but they can cut that out. Judge Nixon was an entirely different experience. Here in the Middle District of Tennessee. In fact, for about 3 months, he and I both were on the bench together before he took formal
Oh,
retirement.
that's very,
Yeah.
that's very interesting. Let's talk a little bit about Chancery Court.
Sure.
What did you learn there in your clerking?
Nashville has some outstanding lawyers because I'm new and fresh out of law school. We had people like Val Sanford to come in with a deep Southern voice and make arguments that are just unlike what you hear today. And the way that he would present it, you had people like Bill Willis who would do the same. And I got a quick dose of some of the best lawyers in Davidson County and in the National Bar for history.
And during that era, for example, a motion docket would be, the courtroom would be full.
That's right. And the courtroom would be full and everyone was really presenting their cases. And I learned a lot. You learn a lot by hearing lawyers argue what they say, what they don't say, what they say against each other. And I think the professionalism really struck me. I can disagree with you without being disagreeable. Mm-hmm. And at the end, they were still friends. At the end, they were still fond of each other, but I'm representing my client. And that was a lesson I learned there. I also learned that very quickly words matter. Words matter when you're arguing, and words matter when you in your briefs. And that was something that stuck with me as I began my career. So it was a great place to see some of Nashville's best lawyers. We had some interesting cases in Chancery, there's where all the big cases would come. And it was a good dose of everything from constitutional law to statutory interpretations and contract cases, workers' compensation. It was
administrative law.
Administrative law. This is the capital. So it was a great place to begin to learn the profession.
So you did all. So interestingly, so all 3 chancellors.
One law clerk for 3 chancellors.
Wow.
That's right.
Wow.
That's right.
Yeah. So that's.
And they were all different.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that probably seeing the difference in their demeanor and
their
style, the personality is very interesting.
Chancellor High, I would give him a draft opinion, and if the opinion was 5 pages long, he would make it 3. If I gave an opinion was 3 pages long, he would make it 2. If I gave an opinion of 2 pages, he'd make it 1.
Right.
So, and I learned at that point, every word mattered. Make it meaningful. Make it
right.
We're communicating to the parties with that. And then I learned how politics not influences decisions, but Chancellor Gilcrease was the first Black chancellor in the state of Tennessee. He knew my father. There was an age difference. So when it came time for him to run for election, he walks into my office, the library, and says, "Waverly, what should I do? Should I run as a Republican or run as a Democrat?" And I looked up at him, still wet behind the ears, and said, "Well, that just depends. If you run as a Republican, you're going to lose. Will the governor appoint you to another one? Because you're going to lose as a Republican," because I knew Nashville was Davidson County. But if you run as a Democrat, then I think you're going to have a chance to win. You got to decide. So that was fun, being part of that and watching his campaign that I worked in with him. Chancellor Gilcrease is a very shy man, very shy. And at campaign events, he would just stand next to me, keep talking. And finally, I said, the chancellor, you got my vote. You don't have their vote. You need to go and talk to them. So I've just made him go. And by the end of the campaign, he could talk to anybody and everything at Lynch. So it was a fun. And then Chancellor Brent was always great with new ideas and new thoughts that just really provoked your thinking. He and I would have some disagreements, but it was fun doing that with him and quite the learning experience.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
They just had the joy of appearing before all of them, and um, just that it interesting times, and you learn a lot. So then you clerked for Judge John Nixon, who is the one of the district judges for the Middle District of Tennessee. And how long did you do that?
For 2 years,
All
about
right.
2 years and 2 months. So
Okay. And tell me about that experience.
Well, it started interestingly. I did not know Judge Nixon, but I knew his wife, Betty Nixon. And I'd worked with Betty in the governor's office, Governor Blanton's office. She was assistant press secretary, and I was the assistant to the assistant press secretary. And it was my
When
first
Governor Blanton was
with
in.
Governor
Okay.
Blanton for a summer. And I really went to my first, back then, $100 a plate dinner. And I said, well, I can't wait to see what we're going to have for $100. And I was, and I learned about
Same rubber chicken.
rubber chickens are, but she exposed me to so much, and dignitaries would come to town as part of the staff. I would be there and see those things. And in the process, met Judge Nixon, and actually, when he hired me, he started telling everyone but me. And someone, I think I had to talk to him, says, well, I hear you're going to be Judge Nixon's law clerk. I said, oh, I am. And that's how I learned that he had selected me. But it was an incredible opportunity, clerking on the federal court. And I always say, anybody who's a law clerk, you have in the back of your mind, oh, I wouldn't mind being the judge, but you wouldn't express that to anyone. That'd be arrogant to think you could be a federal judge. But it certainly plants that seed because of the nature.
So you learned, obviously, what type of cases came before him. Lots of criminal cases.
We didn't do criminal. He did all the criminal on his own. Back then, they sentencing was all discretionary. So we never did any. We did all the civil matters. So
so that's how they divided the docket up.
Well, no, he had criminal cases and civil cases, but he didn't ask the law clerks.
I see. Okay, I didn't understand. Okay.
He handled it all on his own. I did go out with him on the bench once. I said, well, I want to watch one of these criminal cases just to know what's going on. And he went out where he was sentencing a young man who had stolen diamond rings and diamond bracelets from neighbors in Belmead. And he was the son of a very well-known, financially secure businessman here in Nashville. So he did not need the money. His father had as much money as anyone else. But he was breaking into people's homes and stealing diamond rings, and it was always diamond bracelets and whatnot, and finally got caught. And Judge Nixon, so I went out with him when he was getting ready to sentence. He was going to sentence the young man, and he had a very, very good lawyer as his defense lawyer. And Judge Nixon goes out and goes through the process and decides that he's going to give the young man probation. Oh no, that doesn't seem right. And I didn't say a word. He didn't ask me or anything. So we get off the bench, and I turned to Judge Nixon and I said, well, I was really surprised by your sentence. Why did you do that? Because if that had been me, Judge, I think I'd be headed to jail. And he said that the fact that he's on probation, that's going to hit him in a way that's more serious than going to jail, because he's going to have to report to somebody, which he's not used to doing. He's going to have to, give a specimen, which he's not. It's going to humble him in a way that will deter him. And I said, well, yeah, you may be right about that, but also hearing that jailhouse door close on him, but that would humble him too. So he turned red when I said that to him. That was the beginning of the end of my criminal.
Oh my, yes. Well, and there were other, do you recall any other witnessing any other big constitutional law cases?
Judge Nixon had the first death case where Ronald Harris, I believe was his name, waived all of his habeas appeals and said, put me to death. So he waived all of those appeals, and the case fell to Judge Nixon, and he wanted the state to execute him. It was, obviously had a lot of notoriety to it. But what happened was a third party came in on his behalf and essentially argued he was not competent. And the reason he wasn't competent to make that decision is because of the conditions that they were having to live in. So I was there when Judge Nixon issued the first injunction to halt his sentence of death until the parties could be heard on whether the conditions on death row in Tennessee were so bad that people would rather be put to death than to live in such conditions. And it went on eventually to cause some very positive changes occur on death row in terms of the conditions of confinement.
So did that later sort of become the Grubbs case,
yeah,
which was the prison condition case that lingered for quite a while. I think the parties entered into an agreed order that lingered for a long time with the monitors and so forth.
It was certainly true to the federal court. They had a lot of big decisions, and that was an incredible opportunity for somebody so young and immature.
Oh yeah, to understand all of that. So after your time with Judge Nixon, what did you do?
So after Judge Nixon, I went to the state attorney general's office. Judge Nixon was very good friends with General Bill Leach, the attorney general and reporter. And when I was looking for a job, that was one that I was looking at. Judge Nixon met with General Leach. I think they may have met over a cocktail. And the next day, Judge Nixon says, well, Bill Leach says he's going to hire you as an assistant attorney general. And I said, oh, okay. Do I need to interview? He says, no, he's got a space for you. So I had a job there. And I said, well, I look forward to that, but Judge, you might need to tell him I do not want to represent the state of Tennessee in any discrimination cases. I'm not going to do that. And so, which is kind of
employment or otherwise.
In any kind of discrimination cases, especially employment, which is what I had been handling for Judge Nixon. And that's sort of funny because I went on to become a defense employment lawyer, but I still had my ideals, and
you would not do that. So what did you do?
I did consumer protection and antitrust, where we were going into court with the white hat, shutting down businesses that were engaged in unfair and deceptive trade practices. And it was just a ton of fun. Went all over the state of Tennessee and was able to obtain a lot of injunctive relief. People who had paid for trips to the Holy Land, and there was no trip to go, to some guy in Franklin who had these discount coupons that he was selling to people, but they were worthless. And I'm wearing the white hat, and I'm out there protecting. So it was just fun every day. And we had a great group, and it was a good way to learn how to actually practice law. And I did that for about 2 years, and then went to a small labor employment firm on the plaintiff worker side. So our big client was the United
Passano,
Passano Delaney and Passano Delaney and then Passano Delaney and Hildebrand. Um,
and so they were a plaintiff's employment law firm.
and union. So our big client, in many ways, our only client was the United Mine Workers of America. So got back into federal court throughout the South and did some traditional labor work, and that was great. And did that for a couple of years until I had court one day in Columbia, Tennessee. And I was down there for a little matter.
Where was this? Columbia?
Columbia. And I was there on a motion docket, and in walks Bill Leach in the courtroom. I looked up, and of course, I go and speak to him. So it's good to see you. And Bill Leach he says, come to my office. He had an office there in Columbia. We'll have a cup of coffee. And I said, oh, no, I don't want to bother you. No, I want you to come and have a cup of coffee. So after court, go back to his office there in Columbia, and I get my coffee, and I'm stirring the sugar in there. And General Leach is just he and I in the room. He looks at me and says, Waverly, I want you to come to Waller, Lanston, Dorch, and Davis. And I just looked at him and I said, well, who are you talking to? And I said, oh, General, that's so nice of you. But back then, they had no Black attorneys. They had a few female attorneys. I said, y'all couldn't possibly be ready for me to join there. But that's so nice for you to say that. And that was that. That was that. And
So was he there then?
he was there then. He was on the executive committee of the firm. And that was that. I just said, that is so nice of you. That's just you to say something like that. And about 3 or 4 months passed, and our one client was not liking to pay us, and that caused friction in the firm. And I called him back, and I said, well, what did you mean about coming to work at Waller Lanston? And that was that. That was that.
And so you went to
I
Waller.
went to Waller Lanston.
And you were an associate, or?
I was an associate
And-
there for several years, and then became their first Black partner. Back then, everybody was an equity partner. And that was right as a lot of the corporations were wanting diverse outside legal counsel. So it was just incredible, great timing.
So that's what you did. I mean, you did employment.
I did employment, but what was going on nationwide were general counsel of corporations were wanting to make sure that their outside counsel really reflect the market that they were working in. So they wanted lawyers of color, they wanted female lawyers, they really wanted to diversify who's representing us in the courtroom. And that was just an incredible good timing on my part, because I was able to get hired for so many companies in the United States.
So like, can you give some representatives, folks
Sure,
that you represented?
it was, well, I guess the big one that hit Nashville was Saturn.
Okay.
Saturn, came to Nashville and GM. Everybody wanted to represent Saturn. Saturn had a Black general counsel, Rod Gilliam, and the Nashville bar, and everybody was welcoming him. They had a big luncheon for him, and he said to the entire bar, if you're going to represent us, you're going to have some diversity on your legal staffs of your firm. And as a result of that, not only did I get hired at Waller, but then Baz hired a Black associate, Boat Cummings, Connors and Berry, no more, but they hired a young lady who had clerked for Thurgood Marshall. Then you had, oh gosh, they represented Third National Bank, and Charlie Warfield, Ferris Warfield and Kennedy, hired Eva LeMay, who had been a basketball standout at Vanderbilt, went to Vanderbilt Law School. All of the firms were hiring Blacks, hiring women, and that first, that really made a difference for female attorneys, for Black attorneys, because the firms knew that for them to be competitive, you have to open up the right staffing those firms. So what Cyrus Booker then became the first Black partner over at Dearborn and Ewing. And Cyrus and I were the two oldest ones, so we would get all the younger associates who were, new in the firms. How do you navigate the firm? What do you do? What do you not do? Um, and that was interesting. That was a time of change in Nashville's legal community.
Yeah, he left Dearborn at
He
some
did.
point when I was on.
He did, but Dearborn, um, I can't remember. I think they lost their big client, which was Commerce Union Bank, and they merged with another firm. I can't remember.
Yeah, I can't remember the
but-
details. Okay, yes.
But it was because of that so many opportunities, and that was really the beginning here in Nashville of how LAW comes into existence. Napier Luby gets bigger, and you had presidents of the bar. People like Charlie Warfield was president. At one point, I was president of Napier Luby. Judge Martha Craig Daughtry was the president of LAW, and Lou Connor was president of the National Bar Association. And for the first time, we would all get together for breakfast.
Oh, that's interesting.
And that was, don't you think we all should be helping each other do that? And so that was a fond memory to work with them.
Yeah,
Do that.
yeah, very, I mean, as the Bar Association, a very diverse group.
Yeah.
To meet, as you say, to do that. And so you became, in 1994, you were named a partner at Waller Lansden, and you were on their board of directors from 2010 to 2013 and the compensation committee during that time. Can you recall, though, so pretty much you did, what was interesting was insurance of employment discrimination defense work
That was
for,
my primary work. I did some other commercial litigation, and then I started doing my really first significant client was a group in Gatlinburg. It was Treetops Resorts, and I don't know how they found me, but they came all the way to Nashville, interviewed me, and hired me to do their real estate work. But that was back, if you're a lawyer, you can read, you can do anything. So they hired me to do their timeshare registrations in every state east of the Mississippi. They hired me on their condominiums and their subdivided land sales, building homes. So I registered those in all of these states. They had a nationwide marketing strategy. And I never will forget when they came and interviewed me in our office, and I said, "Well, we want to hire you. What's your hourly rate?" I said, $75 an hour. And they said, "That'd be fine." And I was just shocked that somebody's going to pay $75 an hour. This is interesting.
so things changed significantly during the years, apparently.
I was getting how the practice works.
Yes, yes. Some of your, I know that in one of your, you were asked to provide significant litigation that you had been involved in. And one of the cases that I wanted to speak about, because it's kind of a interesting case, was it was involved your disability discrimination, and you were representing Saturn, and the accommodation part of the Americans with Disabilities Act. The case is Tip Hart versus
Yes,
Saturn. Okay, wait, tell me about that.
That was the first attempted class action under the ADA that had just gotten passed and in effect. And Ron Kephart brought a purported class action because Saturn was not accommodating him in his disability. Before Judge Higgins, The case was filed in the Columbia docket in the Middle District of Tennessee. And we went to trial and tried the case there. And it started, it was interesting, a couple of points. Back then it was all new, but it really did question because the ADA required individualized accommodation considerations. Could you really have a class action? If you've got to treat everyone individual, then what uniformity comes from having a class action where there's purportedly some commonality between the plaintiffs. And then the other thing that came out there, I think that Saturn's gone now, so I can share it, but it was public, that they had a unique management system. At Saturn, every manager had a partner who was a union representative. So if we were responsible for the final detail of the car, then I would have a union person in that he and I or she and I would together make decisions for the group that's responsible for the final assembly of the car. And that was so novel because usually management makes those decisions. And when the case comes up, we really had to deal with the fact that, well, we don't make decisions, we consent, and the union person talks and the management person talks. So we will consent on a decision. For the best example I still remember is if you and I were planning to go to lunch, well, where are we going to go? Well, let's consent on that. And you might say, I want a hamburger, and I may say, well, I think I want a hot dog. And then we would talk about why we want that and say, well, we could go here because this place has hot dogs and hamburgers. Yeah, but their hamburgers are not as good as a place that does nothing but hamburgers. And we would go back and forth until we could agree. I think here's a restaurant that satisfies your needs. I didn't impose my will on you. You didn't impose it on me. So we can all 100% support going to this place for lunch.
So, yeah, so it sort of gave you the opportunity to learn about this interesting management style.
Very unique
management style. And
litigating.
And then how do you go about accommodating someone with a disability, and whether, as I understand, you the jury concluding that the jury returned a verdict for the employee, and then it was affirmed and reversed in part, with the Sixth Circuit holding that an employer may require people to rotate in and out of a variety of judges for a number of reasons, a variety of jobs for a number of reasons, but you didn't argue on appeal. But anyway, that's a very interesting, case that you did. So as you said, you had a lot of interesting cases. Can you think of anything else?
You've got the list.
Okay, well, I mean, I've got the list. Another class action, Janet Lintemuth versus Saturn, co-lead counsel is one of the first attempted
class actions.
Yeah, plaintiff sought a class action about and then the question, as you mentioned before, is whether you can certify a class in an ADA case because of the difference in individualized treatment of those cases. So
I was just very fortunate to have clients who had interesting issues.
Well, absolutely.
Practical fun.
Friend said, a friend had an associate in the firm, and he said, oh, these people have such problems, these clients. And he said, and that's good because they need us.
That's right. That's right.
So we do that. Okay, talk about, during your time in private practice and before, the type of extra legal, extra office type of
Oh, yeah.
activities that you
No.
participated in.
I think over time, I guess because back then the bar wasn't really quite as big as it is now. So it was easy to become involved in the creation of the Young Lawyers Division, did that with you and John Tarpley and others. Um, was fun, but also it was just an opportunity. If you had an idea, you could move on it. And I remember when the Ends of Court was just created by, I guess then it was back Judge Coke, and he asked me to be part of that. That the first End of Court here in Nashville. So I think because there was such camaraderie within the bar, respect of everyone in the bar with others, it really showed the nature of what we do as professionals. And those are all things that we did to make the profession better, to make it more responsive to what our society needed, but to make sure that the group of people here in Nashville who had committed themselves to being lawyers we're on one team. We might have cases where we're on different sides of the V, but we were all really one team in terms of making sure that Nashville was a special place to practice law. And I think some of that still exists now, stuff that I see on the bench, that for most of the time we show good rapport among lawyers, even though they may be disagreeing in a particular case.
Right. And sort of has it totally gone away with the nationalization of law firms
Yeah.
and the strident nature of the politics and so forth that's going on right now. Did you ever work as a lobbyist or?
I did for my real estate client. I became probably the most expert person on timeshares in the state of Tennessee. And we would go in and make changes, suggest changes to the legislature. And I had the opportunity to write some legislation that got adopted. The interesting thing there was I met Bob Eccles, who went on, to be a district court judge. And Bob knew a lot of the Republican members of the General Assembly, and I knew a number of the Democratic members of it. And we could get all of our legislation supported, and it would pass without opposition. And we never bought anybody anything, not a cup of coffee. We just did it on the merits. Hey, the law needs to be changed because here's the problem we're trying to cure, and work with the regulators to do that. So that was a fun experience, a little different from practicing law, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. And
Yeah.
Bob Eccles was a fun
See
guy
how
to
the
do.
sausage is made, as they say.
That's right.
But and I would think the development, your relationships with the Democratic members, where they knew they could trust
Yeah.
you,
And
developed in Bob's with
because
the
we were not whining and dining
right.
anybody. We had
No,
money for that.
no, they just need to know that they can trust you. What you say is what it is.
Yeah.
And so, what about teaching? Did you teach any laws? You taught it. Professional responsibility in the fall of 19.
You only did that once. I never really did a lot of teaching.
Okay.
I really did. I did that one time.
A little bit. All right. So that kind of brings us up to, so you were at Waller for how many years?
I think maybe over 25.
Okay.
I've got one of the little statutes. I can't remember. It says, I think it says for 20 or 25 years or so. I was there a long time.
Yeah, okay. And tell us about how you came to get your current uh position?
Well, the truth is, I had people like your husband, Bill Young, who had close contacts with then Senator Corker, and relationships that I'd had over time from practicing here. Um, one of those was Richard Dinkins, who was incredibly supportive and a sounding board. And he would always like to say, you know, a person's chances of becoming a federal judge, you have a better chance of being struck by lightning than becoming a federal judge, because everything has to go precisely the right way.
Well, timing
And timing
is
everything has to be just right.
right.
But I think the reason I was ultimately successful is because there were people in Nashville, the Nashville bar, and the community at large, who were willing to vouch for me with Senator Alexander and Senator Corker, and it was their persistence with the White House that got them to see the light and give me the nomination.
So you took the position was created by the senior status of
Joe Haney.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when he took senior status, I think, oh wow, I think Congressman Cooper may have accepted applications, or there was some process he went through. But at the end of the day, I was just fortunate to have people who were supporting me who knew the people who happened to be in charge at the time. Aubrey Harwell was certainly one of those. He had a contact with a man who was the White House counsel. So he had an entree there.
Wow.
Yeah. Then Lou Connor was very supportive, and he and Lamar Alexander grew up together and very close to each other.
Yeah, practiced law together at some point, maybe.
Bill Young had worked for Congress, Senator Corker,
Well, yes.
and did that. And then others in some of the firms came out and supported me and to get the nomination. And finally, I get a call. I was headed to Chattanooga to do some business development. I was taking a client out to dinner, and Melissa, my assistant, called and says, "I have the White House on the phone. They want to talk to you." And I kind of had an idea of what they wanted to talk about. I said, "Well, you should tell them that I'm in a car. There are 7, we're in a van. There's 7 people in the van. I do not have privacy. And I'll call them back in the morning." And they called back in the morning. I said, and I thought about that. I said, "Oh, I'm supposed to be on call back." It was pretty bold. Moved the White House office. Y'all need to call me back another time. But they did call me back.
Thank goodness.
But I think they also appreciated that I was sensitive. It was such secretive.
Right, that you could not speak about it.
Couldn't speak about
it in the presence of others.
And that I had the judgment to tell them I'm not in a position to talk privately. I'm pretty sure you don't want to talk to me unless I can talk privately. Perhaps we should talk in.
Yes.
So I think that got us off to a good start, because at least initially, the whole process is just incredibly private.
So they called you back, and then what would you call that contact? I mean, you just spoke to them about it, and
the White House calls back and says, "Would I be interested in being a district judge here in the Middle District?" And I said, "Yes, I would be interested." And we hang up, and they send me a bunch of papers to start filling out, because at that point they did an internal vetting, and they want to know from the time you were born to this time right now, tell me everything you've ever done. And that took a minute to try to get all that lined up, but they do a very thorough vetting of your personal life, your professional life, your family, and of everything. So that went on, quite frankly, for about a month. I remember the call came in September, and that went on for a month, or maybe even 6 weeks. And then at some point, there was an interview process over the phone. And I spent the day with them on the phone, and they just asked, they went through all that information, started asking more questions, we revised it. And that went on, that was a day-long interview with several folks. At that point, I think these were White House officials and maybe some Department of Justice. And that process goes on for a while. And then they called back and said, well, we want to think about this. We'll let you know something in the future. And I said, oh, I may have said the wrong thing. Sounds like they were blowing me away. But sure enough, they called back and said, we want you to come to Washington for a live interview. And that was a turning point. And
Who did you meet with when you went to
I
Washington?
met with 4 people. I met with 2 from DOJ, was Assistant Attorney General for, I can't remember the title, that did nominations. And then Assistant White House Counsel, Chris Kane, who was in charge of nomination, and he had, so it was 4 of them and 1 of me. And I thought, so they told me where to go, and you get, credentials to get through the White House and get to the room. And because they knew so much about me, I mean, literally from the moment I was born, you know all about me. I mistakenly thought we were friends. So as we gathered in the war room for this, I came and sat next to them on their side. And they said, no, you go over there, we'll be over here. And I said, oh, okay. And for the next hour, they asked me question after question. It was hard question, easy question, hard question, easy question.
About judicial philosophy or?
Me, about a number of things, cases, my career, law school. It was everything. And since this is for history's sake, and I've shared it before, one thing that they had concerned with that I had become a member of the Bellmead Country Club. And we had just questions about that. And
so the Bellmead, for purposes of discussion of this, and so that those in the future who are listening to this, the Bellmead Country Club is an exclusive country club in Nashville that historically had been a whites only, and historically it also only allowed women to be members if they were the widows of their husbands.
And I became the first Black member. At the same time, we had the first female full member. And the White House did not think much of that. And finally, during the 1-hour interview in Washington, they says, well, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Okay, well, why would you want to be a member of the Bellmead Country Club? And we had talked about it before, but not as face-to-face and directly. And by then I'd had about all of that I was willing to take. And I said, look, I understand what the Bellmead Country Club is. I grew up in Nashville. I know the Bellmead Country Club. I know its history. I know that I'm its first Black member. I had family friends who would serve food at the Bellmead Country Club. I know about the Bellmead Country Club. But my position was, if I could change that, don't I have a responsibility to do something? And what would you want for it to stay all white? And would we call that progress? And that sort of stopped them. And look, we all looked at each other and said, that was the end of it. Never came up again. And then at the end of that, I do remember they said, would you be surprised if we have learned that some lawyers think, I don't know if they may have said people, you don't have the temperament to be a judge. And that really surprised me. Yes, that would surprise me, because I've always tried to treat people in the way that I would want to be treated. So it would surprise me if someone said that, and that was it. It's over, and my time was up.
You think that was just a trick question?
And I later found out, I think it might have been because after we did the White House interview, the next step is the ABA does their investigation, and you go through the FBI investigation. And during the ABA investigation, they come in, now it's getting public and talking to everybody in my neighborhood, at my church. They want to know people you went to elementary school with. And I said, oh my goodness, this is a lot. And part of that process is they do their investigation, they gather this information, they come back to you and let you respond to anything that is negative that they concern. So my guy was, oh, I can't remember, I think he was from Ohio. And he comes, starts it, we come back for the final interview, and he says, well, Mr. Crenshaw, we're at that point of the interview where I share with you things that have been said about you that you might want to respond to. And I said, okay. And they says, we have no things that people have said about you negatively. And I said, oh, good. And then that's why I said, maybe the question at the White House was to see my reaction, because at least at the ABA process, during all of their investigation, no one said anything negative that I had to try to explain or otherwise talk about. So
Well,
you
maybe
draw your
it's
own,
a testing sort of something to see what your temperament is. If you,
because I was like, yeah, I said, oh, good, I'm going to find out what exactly was he talking about at the interview. And he says, well, we have no negative things to share with you for you to respond to. Oh, but that was not, yeah.
yeah,
But that's all right. It all went that high.
yeah. So then so after the nomination was put into place by the President Obama, then you had to appear before the Senate Judiciary Committee.
Yeah, I think the nomination occurred on February the 1st, or the first week in February. And now it's finally public. The ABA had done their thing and had favorably recommended me. And then you wait on the Senate committee hearing. And that occurred in July of 2015.
Wow.
2015.
10 years ago,
Because
almost 10 years ago.
I had a cousin who passed, and she passed in Alabama, muscle shows. And went down for her funeral, and the funeral was done. We had the repast. I'm in my car coming home, and the phone rings, and it says unknown. That's all. Well, that's odd. Who's unknown? And it was the White House calling to let me know that they were getting me to schedule me for a Senate Judiciary Committee. And long story short, there you go up a week. I think I went up a couple of days. I was there all week. I think it was a Wednesday. I think I went Sunday or Monday. And Department of Justice prepares you for the hearing. Questions. And it was three of us. Judge McDonough, who now sits in Chattanooga, and I did it together. And Felipe Restrepo, who is a district court judge who was nominated to the Third Circuit. So we all got prepared together. For that preparation, they says, well, let's talk about the question that may come up, the bail meet thing. So we go through that again. And it was good preparation of how to respond to Senator's question. And then the next day, I think it was Wednesday, you go up for the hearing. And that was great. Senator Corker was there, introduced me. Senator Alexander was there and introduced me. And there was a senator from Georgia who was chairing that day. And we got some questions, but we didn't get any really, really hard questions. So it come out of the Senate Judiciary Committee on a voice vote in July, at the end of July. But things being as they are, and it was getting ready for the election year, I did not get a final vote on the floor of the Senate until April. 2016. And that was the second week, and I get a vote on the Senate, and I have friends over, so you can watch the vote. And I never will forget, they call the roll, and the senators vote, and no one was voted. And I came out of bed. My vote was 92-0. But at the end of the first round, it was only like 45 or 43 yay votes. And everybody got sad because they thought, well, he didn't make it. Oh, y'all don't need to be sad. They're going to keep doing this till everybody votes. and then other senators come in, they vote. So we go from 45 to 50 and 51. And we all, okay, we got it. Then 50, 60, 70, and ended up 92-0. And we have a little champagne.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think I recall being there.
But you were there.
Yes.
And
that was fun. Yeah.
Thought, oh, he didn't get it. I said, no, I watched a number of these things. They're going to keep voting.
Yeah, they're going to keep voting, and that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So then you took office when?
April the 15th, I was
Okay.
sworn in.
Okay. And
2016.
so you have been
2000.
on the bench
Yeah.
for that length of time, 9 years, and
10 years next year.
yeah, and you like this job.
I like it. I'm going to keep it as long as I'm healthy and I can do it.
Yeah. As you say, I think you mentioned earlier, I mean, what's your favorite part of being the district judge?
Oh, wow. I think I can answer the reverse question easier.
Okay.
My least favorite.
Okay.
My least favorite part are sentencing. That is a very difficult process. There is no such thing as an easy sentence. It's just not.
The guidelines, are you limited by the
No, I mean, you're really not. I mean, you have to calculate the guideline range and pay attention to it. But for me, it's just such an awesome, heavy decision that this person, when there are 3 dates in this person's life: the day they were born, the day they die, and the day they get sentenced by a federal judge. So this is a moment. So it's just very hard to make, because you do have a lot of discretion. What's the right number? Is it 2 years? Is it 5 years, or something in between? And you're measuring what people have done in their life, because we get information about everything that's happened in life, and you really do see, or you can see in their life. Well, the mother was an alcoholic, and the father couldn't hold a job. So sure, there are going to be some tension and challenges as a family with that nature. And then people who didn't have that growing up experience where they learned right from wrong and gravitated toward other conduct. And you can see the progression of it, theft of a lawnmower, now we're stealing a car, and then guns, and then the impact that drugs has on people. And I'm trying to measure that to say, okay, what is the right amount of time to punish you, to deter you, to protect the public, to incentivize you to be more respectful to the law, and at the same time have compassion that there are some things that happen in your life that you have no control over.
Mm-hmm.
And how much weight does that give? My favorite quote actually is one by then Judge Gorsuch that says, essentially, sentencing is one of the most difficult things that a district court judge does, because who knows what's the right amount of time without being vengeful. Who knows how to weigh things that are not subject to being weighed.
Mm-hmm.
And we leave all of that to the discretion of the district judge to determine what the sentence should be. So, that is still, almost 10 years into it, still the most time consuming part, because I'm talking to myself. Law clerks typically don't help me on that. And I don't like for somebody to give me a number, because once you hear that, I said, well, maybe I should do that. But sometimes will invite it if it's particularly hard. But I will say, over time, you kind of learn what's important to, I learned what's important to me. So I put those things in those buckets, things
Right.
important. For example, if it's, if Jane had a firearm, did you use it? If you used it, was somebody hurt? Was somebody killed? Was Jane on drugs? Was she on drugs because she was sexually abused as a child? And you can see the progression. Started at 9, and then ever since, she's been using more and more drugs. So I look at those, was it violence involved in the crime, or is this your first time ever in your 45 years of existence that you've ever done anything wrong? So I put things in a bucket, and that helps me get to whatever the number is that I do. So I look at categories of information to see where, and I look at the guideline. That's still an important
Sure,
part, but I'm really
sure.
trying to focus more on what the behavior is. It's if there's any part about the job that I could not do,
That would be it. Yeah, because
would
that's
not
just an
send it.
awesome,
I never sentence another person.
responsibility to do that. So yeah. But you enjoy meeting with the jurors and
I enjoy the job. I think, federal district court judges are the last generalists in our profession, because, folks coming out of law school now starting to practice, you're going to have to go into an area. When you and I came out, you could do everything. I was litigating. I'm a real estate lawyer. I probate lawyer. I can do it all. But we're the last generalists, and I would say the fun part of the job is I know what's on my docket. I know what case I'm going to hear. But every day I'm going from, here's a civil rights issue, here's a securities issue, over here we got a personal injury, slip and fall. Now I've got to do this sentencing over here. It's just the potpourri of things you get to do during the day that is taxing, but also just keeps you mentally alert.
Sure.
Because I'm going from thing to thing all day long.
Yeah, I've always thought that was the curiosity about, I've always thought that was one of the fun things really about being a lawyer, is learning about things that you never would have thought about before. And then you just suddenly, not an expert, but
right, you're not an expert, but you got to make a decision.
But you got to make a decision, or you learn a lot, and you, from the other lawyers, from the clients, from the witnesses.
And the interesting thing, at least for me, has been, when I became a judge, I got an opinion about everything. But none of that really, once you're into a case, I don't know how it's going to come out. It's sort of following the trail. And what does the statute say? What do the cases say? And you follow that trail and say, oh, you would. Because we've looked at the statute, we've looked at the cases interpreting, here are your facts. And if I apply this law to your facts, you lose and you win. Oh, I didn't see that coming.
Right.
I really,
it's not like
the result is not really not result oriented. I am not necessarily surprised, but the results come out sometimes, and I'll tell the law clerks, I said, I don't see any way around this. Here's the facts. Here's the law. I can't just change it because this
I don't like it, or this person's nice
and
they're
think
not.
It's a bad law.
Right.
I don't get to say that. So we truly are applying facts to law, but I will say at the trial court level, we do get to find the facts. And that means I get to determine credibility. And sometimes that guides how we're going.
So we're talking about your district judge. Are you still able to participate in community activities?
Yep, you have to, I do, especially the legal activities. But you have to be careful not to create conflicts.
Sure.
And so I'm pretty, not as much as, I did as a lawyer, but avoiding conflicts. And part of the reason for that is, now that I've taken the position, I've got an obligation to make sure I can sit on cases. So you have to be careful about the potential conflicts down the road.
Well, I think we're getting close to the end. One of the things that I like to ask people in these interviews is, in your view, how has the practice of law changed over the course of your career?
Sure. Well, for one thing, it's become more specialized. As I mentioned, when I started, you did anything anybody wanted to ask you to do. And that is no more. Now you've got to pick a particular specialty. I think initially it was either litigation or corporate. Now it's even more specialized. And I think that that probably slows down young lawyers' development, because there are only so many opportunities within a particular niche to develop yourself, have a case, have a trial, be the person who's the lead lawyer on it over time. And also, I think what the changes that are now occurring with chat BGT, or these new artificial intelligence mechanisms where you can ask these questions, is changing it even more. I mean, we haven't seen how that's going to impact. We're seeing people write briefs file briefs with cases that don't exist and things like that.
Hallucinations, I think they call it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
With CLE on it.
Yeah. So that's changing the practice. What I think is concerning is if young lawyers are getting the opportunity to develop their skills in a way to be productive later in their career. And also the business aspect of it has probably made the bar less congenial, because everyone is competing for business. And if I help you, I may be doing it to my own detriment. So that makes the bar not quite as collegiate, I should say, as it used to be. And I think that's bad. I think clients are more demanding, which you're on a lawyer. That's something you need to take into account. But at the same time, I've been impressed with some firms who are really working hard to find a work-life balance. I've been very impressed with firms that encourage, lawyers work from home on Mondays and Fridays. Very impressed with firms that are bringing lunch in for everybody, just so you can have that camaraderie there in the law firm. We've came on when, Leach was a mentor of mine, but we didn't have an official. He didn't come up to me and say, Waverly, I'm going to be your mentor and you're going to be my mentee. It just developed. But now firms being deliberate. My mentee started the practice, and I was so impressed that his firm he's got a partner mentor, he's got an associate mentor, and wow, that's great that they're thinking like that. So
to create some formality to it, because I
Yeah.
think when we were there, it was not, as you say, it wasn't formalized.
no, not at all. So that's encouraging as the profession developed. So I think like anything else, there's positives and negatives. But overall, I think we're responding as a profession. Um, but there may be new challenges ahead.
Well, that's a good way to stop, I think. Do you have anything else you want to add? All right, well, thank you very much, Judge Crenshaw. It's been fascinating.
you.
Appreciate it.